From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson here, and ahead today, K-State's Justin Waggoner will talk about retaining and feeding cull cows this fall and winter, and he'll talk about using the online BeefBasis tool for making marketing decisions on fall-weaned calves. Then K-State's Brian Briggeman will take a look at the financial state of agricultural cooperatives in Kansas. He says that co-ops are facing their own economic obstacles, much as you producers are. Later, from the Kansas FFA, J.W. Wells files another report from the National FFA Convention. And on this week's horticulture segment, K-State's Raymond Cloyd returns with more on applying dormant oils to landscape and fruit trees. All that right here on Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State research and extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, coming to you from the campus of Kansas State University. Welcome to you once again. For you cow-calf producers, a couple of items. First, the option of feeding cull cows, and secondly, decision-making on whether or not to market those weaned calves. Joining us now via phone is Justin Waggoner, a beef systems specialist for K-State Research and Extension. Justin, as you well know, is based in southwest Kansas. The idea of feeding cull cows has sprung up and it has been circulating out there the last few years, Justin, and there's good reason for this.
That's right, Eric. If we look at sources of revenue or potential sources of revenue on a cow-calf operation, you know, there's really 2 primary sources of revenue. The first and the largest, that's obviously going to be calf sales. However, the second primary source of revenue is going to be the sale of cull animals. And what oftentimes surprises a lot of people as we dig into this data a little bit is that the sale of cull animals can sometimes account for as much as 24% of the gross revenue on an operation.
Wow.
The range around that is somewhere, you know, on the low end, it's usually 12. So in either case, it's still a primary source of revenue that I think is oftentimes overlooked on operations.
Those numbers ring very clear when it comes down to the bottom line. So selling them into the current market, well, if one looks at the cull cow price levels right now, they're not terribly exciting, Justin.
That's correct, Eric. You know, we just kind of came off what I would call maybe a couple of years or maybe even 3 years of what I'd call maybe historically higher cull cow prices. Prices right now in 2019 are a little bit softer than what they were even in 2018. However, I don't think the price alone necessarily tells all the story. The cull cow prices tend to be very seasonal. They tend to bottom out in the months of October, November, December a lot of times, and that's mostly just due to an increase in supply. Here in Kansas, we tend to have a large percentage of our operations are going to be spring calving. We tend to preg check in the fall, so that's when we send a lot of those cows to market. So as that supply goes up, the price goes down. But the important part of that story is in that seasonality, there's usually anywhere from 10 to 20 cents of an increase in the market as we get into the highs of that market, which are typically going to be in the February, March, or what I would call maybe the mid to late spring months that are still possibly on the table. And even in 2018, where we did see lower cull cow prices relative to previous years, there was still that seasonal increase of about $10 in those cull cow prices.
So this then gives rise to the idea of, once one determines that they are open, those cull cows, putting them on some sort of feeding regimen to carry them to that more optimal marketing point.
That's correct, Eric. I think there's 2 points in that strategy. You know, one, what condition are those cows in? And maybe looking at current market conditions, if you don't feel in your area that those cull cow prices may have bottomed out yet, or depending on the timing. And if those cows are in good condition, say those cows are fit and are a body condition score of 5 or better, in some cases, if that market hasn't bottomed out, or we may not have this, let's say in a dry year, we may not have the inventory in terms of forage resources or on a resource base to carry those cows. In those circumstances, we want to market those cows as soon as possible. Mm-hmm. But however, if we're dealing with a situation where we've got some forage resources that maybe we could utilize, maybe those cows are a little out of condition, that where there's an opportunity for us to put 80 to 100 pounds of live weight on those cows, and we're looking at maybe an increase in the market somewhere down the road, let's say 60 to 90 days down the road, that can be a situation where maybe looking at a kind of a cull cow feeding enterprise might be beneficial.
But this works only if you can make the numbers balance, and that is to say, if you can feed them at an economical pace with quality forage enough to put that 80 to 100 pounds of live weight on them without costing you too much. And what are the typical forages that'll suit those purposes?
Yeah, so the nice thing about cull cows is that their nutrient requirements are relatively low. So that really helps us where we can, in some instances, use lower quality forages, milo stalks, even wheat pasture could present another alternative for some of those cows to go, which would be well above what their requirements would be. Mm-hmm. That's kind of the low input type system is maybe to do something like that. Now, there's also the other end of the spectrum where we could do more of a dry lot type program with those cows, looking at a higher concentrate or a higher grain-based ration that we would likely limit feed to those cows. I'm just going to say typically a limit-fed program would be maintain those cows on a 2% of body weight on a dry matter basis type feeding program. So it's a very nutrient-dense program. And really what we're trying to do there is actually improve our feed efficiencies with those cows. So there's a spectrum of strategies that can be utilized to put weight gain on those cows. The important thing to remember there is it really doesn't take a lot in terms of those cows' nutrient requirements. They're relatively low, which means that it can be pretty easy for us to put 80 to 100 pounds of live weight on those cows.
So cow-calf operators, if you have animals that are going to town, think about the alternative of putting them on some sort of feeding program here in the coming weeks and months and carrying them through to that better marketing opportunity. Also want to lend some time, Justin, to the question of when to market those weaned calves. What are you suggesting that producers think about there right now?
Well, Eric, I certainly don't have a crystal ball this year. We know that there's been quite a bit of volatility in the market this fall. That's just kind of my generic term for it. But I think, anyone that's kind of looking at the current situation, it seems like we've got a lot of folks that may be considering holding on to those calves for a little bit, trying to stretch out here a little bit, and maybe put a few more pounds of live weight on those calves. Once again, kind of coming back to those two primary sources of revenue, I think it's also important to kind of touch on that the price we receive for our calves is one of the primary, drivers of that revenue, right? So doing everything that we can to maximize the price that we receive for those calves when we do make that marketing decision, I think is maybe worth spending some time on. There's a lot of discussion about preconditioning programs, and those certainly have a lot of value. And not all producers are set up to be able to participate in some of those programs. But I still think it's worth, the analogy I like to use is if a producer were selling a very nice vintage used pickup, if they were going to sell that pickup, they would have likely every receipt. They would have all kinds of documentation that that they had done. They might even have the original, invoice from 1977 that they would sell along with that pickup. I don't think selling calves is really any different than that. It's, can we pass along some of that information? Maybe having a conversation with the auctioneer or the sale barn that's going to market those calves for us, kind of documenting what we've done, vaccination practices, management practices, and just moving that alongside with the cattle. Even if we're not participating in one of those value-added programs, can certainly, maybe it adds, $2 to $3 to the hundredweight or the price of those calves.
Mm-hmm. You advocate as well utilizing information on the BeefBasis ledger, if you will, out there. This has been put together by experts at K-State and elsewise to help producers determine the prime time, if you will, to market those calves.
I do, Eric, and a lot of times producers, they kind of feel like they don't really control the price that they receive for those calves, and they do feel a little bit helpless when their set of calves comes through the sale ring. But, with BeefBasis, we can actually kind of go out there and start to maybe make some better decisions about some of the factors that we do control that ultimately influence that sale price. The time of when we're going to sell those calves. What are we going to sell? Calves versus feeders. Is the value of gain enough for us to offset the cost of that gain? When are we going to sell? Maybe there's an opportunity for a producer to maybe target or upgrade those cattle. And by upgrade, the simplest type of upgrade that I kind of think of is, basic management practices, dehorning. We don't see it as much of that anymore, but certainly castration. Maybe we can do a sort on those calves, sorting off the heavy weights, and just do some basic things to maybe make those calves a little bit more attractive in terms of the package that they would offer to a buyer. BeefBasis is a great tool for producers to be able to go in and look at some historic data for wherever they're going to sell their calves. You can pick several locations in Kansas, make kind of a historic feel for what calf prices have been, as well as do a little bit of price forecasting using the futures market to determine what if I want to hold these calves to the second week of March? What does that ultimately look like? And what might they be worth if I sold them at a particular livestock market here in Kansas?
You can plug about any scenario you choose into that BeefBasis tool, and it'll help you arrive at an answer that'll guide you, if nothing else, towards a marketing decision for those weaned calves. It's at beefbasis.com, by the way, simply accessed by beefbasis.com. Justin, thank you very much. We appreciate your time right here.
Yep. Thanks again, Eric.
Justin Waggoner with us. Justin is the Beef Systems Specialist, K-State Research and Extension, based in Southwest Kansas, offering those marketing considerations for you cow-calf producers. You're listening to Agriculture Today. Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today, 800-321-3276, or visit us online, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions. This is Agriculture Today. The month of October has been recognized as National Cooperative Month, so to round out this occasion, we brought by the director of the Arthur Capper Cooperative Center in the Department of Agricultural Economics at Kansas State, Brian Briggeman, to share a few thoughts on the state of our farmer cooperatives around Kansas as we finish out this calendar year. It's worthwhile, Brian, to go back to the actual business model, if you will, of cooperatives to have an understanding of how they work.
Yeah, that's right, Eric. It is good to reflect back on that co-op model because many of us just take it for granted and we don't really think a lot about it because it's just part of maybe our everyday life. So the cooperative business model really goes back to three kind of core principles, three things that are guideposts, if you will, that if a cooperative wants to continue to be successful, they need to really do these three things really well. And it really illuminates the co-op business model. So the first of the three is user ownership. So those who use the cooperative, whether they're a farmer, whether they get their electricity from a co-op, telephone services, maybe they conduct banking services with like a credit union or have a loan with a farm credit, they use the cooperative. They have that ownership. So they provide equity stock into it. They have that connection. So it's that connection piece really comes from that user owner. The second piece is control. So user control. So those who use the co-op vote on issues that come up that are brought to the general membership. They also serve on the board of directors. So to have that local control, that say in the business and where it is going matters a great deal. I certainly hear that as I go out and talk to various cooperative users. You know, the control piece is very important. And then third and last piece is user benefit. So there has to be some sort of benefit if we're going to own, cooperative, put our own money into it. If we are going to take time out of our day to go to annual meetings or maybe serve on the board of directors, I need to have some benefit to come from that. And there are numerous benefits from, the farmer cooperative providing spraying services, the credit union providing a place in which to get a loan for a house, or even, benefits to communities that they serve, being at the local county fair, being a part of that, providing scholarships. Certainly, the benefits go on and on, even to providing cash patronage back out into the countryside. Certainly is something that does help in a period of time of stress like we've been in here in agriculture. So there are a number of benefits that they provide. So, to sum it up, the cooperative business model really boils down to these three things of user owner, user control, and user benefit.
And the model has operated extraordinarily well for many years' time, especially in the agricultural realm. And you do have some statistics of the financial benefits accrued by farmer cooperatives, both on the national and the state level. You might share those numbers to further illustrate this, Brian.
Yeah, this is a project, Eric, a research project I started on last year and continue to do, and we're continuing to collect data because it is important for us to think about those farmer cooperatives across our state. Certainly there are benefits to farmers, but there are also other benefits to those folks who live in rural areas. I mean, many times, Eric, I don't know how many times I've heard that, a farmer cooperative is oftentimes the largest employer in a rural area. They also pay a significant amount of property taxes. And I just was like, well, there's data out there that we can look at to say, what is that amount? What does it amount to? So if we look across the entire United States, over 190,000 jobs are supported by farmer cooperatives, mostly in rural areas. They pay over $8 billion in wages. And then if you look at the U.S. agricultural sector, roughly about 60% of all U.S. ag sales, or right at about $245 billion, are connected to an ag co-op. So that, harnessing that cooperative model within agriculture has certainly been very successful. And it's shown here in Kansas, too. So just obviously smaller scale, go from the entire U.S. down to Kansas. But in Kansas, over 4,600 jobs are supported by farmer cooperatives, over $300 million in wages. And then we have $10 billion in sales that go through our farmer cooperatives. So for Kansas, it's important, and it's especially important for rural America.
And associated with that, what's called in common economic jargon, the ripple effect, those benefits will trickle down to the rest of the local economy.
Right. So when you look at multiplier effects, or like the ripple effect, we know, just thinking about it intuitively, that if we have some sort of economic activity in a particular area, such as a job, that individual who receives that wage is more than likely going to spend stuff locally. And there will be some additional benefits to other industries in that local area. So I had a research student who developed a set of models and worked on this research project. And one of the findings she had is that for every job that is out there for farmer cooperatives in the state of Kansas, roughly just over one other job is supported. And so that 4,600 jobs essentially turns into about just over 9,000 total jobs that come from the farmer cooperative industry that support being in rural America, being in rural Kansas, helping support. So as I like to think about it, to boil it down, maybe not to non-economist speak, it's a BOGO, right? So you buy one, you get one on the job front. So it's important for not only our farmers, but it's also important for rural Kansas, the economic activity that comes from farmer cooperatives.
Well, Brian, with all that then as backdrop, Where do farmer cooperatives stand as, once again, we head into the latter couple of months of 2019? We know that there have been difficult times economically for our farmers out there for a variety of reasons. Are those being reflected in the cooperative state of affairs?
Sure. So whenever I think about where are farmer cooperatives at from a financial standpoint, look how the farmer is doing. Because of the co-op business model, right? If it's user owner, user control, user benefit, well, the user in that case is farmer. And if your business model is so closely connected to the farmer, to the user, you're going to tend to go how they go. So and this goes right into financials. So when we look at profitability for farmer cooperatives, it's down since the boom that we had in 2012 to 14. Certainly things were very good for production agriculture. Things were very high for farmer cooperatives in Kansas. In fact, if you look at return on equity, it was right around 20% on average, and in some cases was nearing 30% for certain co-ops that were out there. So things were very, very robust. Well, today, as we know, we're not at the boom levels. We have reached pre-boom levels, and in the case of farmer cooperatives, we're even below that. So on average, return on equity over a 10-year average tends to be right around 10%. For farmer cooperatives today, on average, it's right around 4%. And around that 4% average, if we look at smaller farmer co-ops, those with less than $50 million in sales, that average is right around 2%. Larger co-ops, those with greater than $100 million in sales, are doing a bit better. They're right around 8%, but they're still below that 10-year average. So things from a profitability standpoint are challenging out there today.
But they're not dire, to put it that way. These are less than favorable numbers, but not so dramatically so that you would declare it an emergency situation economically, right?
No, I agree, Eric, that things are certainly on top of mind for board of directors because here in the winter, as harvest wraps up, they'll start their strategic planning sessions. They definitely need to be mindful of their position and make sure that they're outlaying capital well. But from a financial standpoint, it's not dire. If you look at the data on year-over-year growth in net fixed assets, so looking at investments, brick, mortar, machinery, those things, fixed assets that are out there, we see that growth being about 10%. So we're seeing cooperatives continue to invest, which is a good thing, because producers are having to continue to keep up with the U.S. consumer, feeding a global economy, growing. So we need to make sure we're continuing to invest. But also, too, cooperatives have a pretty strong working capital position. So have a strong amount of liquidity. In fact, it's 6 times higher than what it was in 2005. So that's good on 2 fronts. One, it helps them weather storms. Building up a good, strong working capital base helps us get through periods of stress, but also it allows us to jump on opportunities that might be out there. So they are able to use some of that quick capital, some capital they can get access to fairly quickly to invest in an opportunity to add value back to their membership. So, if I was to round it out, things are tough from a profitability standpoint. We haven't reached dire areas. Now, of course, that's on average.
Right.
There's always cases to the really good, and then there's cases to the really bad. But by and large, that would be my assessment for farmer cooperatives in Kansas.
Bears close watching, of course, as it does for the broader agricultural economy. This is a great overview to give folks an idea of how farmer cooperatives are faring. And Brian, thanks for coming over and sharing these numbers and those thoughts.
Thanks, Eric.
He's the director of the Arthur Capper Cooperative Center out of the Department of Agricultural Economics here at Kansas State University. Brian Briggeman with us on this part of Agriculture Today.
Did you know every Kansas farmer feeds 128 plus people?
Kansas farmers are hard workers, dependable, authentic, and sensitive.
Not only do farmers put food on your table, but they put clothes on your back and fuel in your car.
For more information about Kansas farmers, visit K-State Research and Extension online or stop by your local Extension office. This message has been brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
Agriculture Today continues now on the K-State Radio Network. Eric Atkinson with you. And with now another update from the 92nd National FFA Convention in Indianapolis. Again, providing us details of what's going on at convention, J.W. Wells. He's the state FFA reporter from the Sedan FFA chapter. So a busy day yesterday, and let's just quickly recap the delegate business that occurred on the floor yesterday. What sorts of things were taken up, J.W., and discussed?
Thank you very much for having me on, Eric. I love this opportunity to be able to share what we as delegates for this great organization have been able to accomplish. Yesterday was a very busy day indeed. We all buckled up, tightened up our bootstraps, and we were able to get all of our delegate business done before lunch yesterday, which is actually a very rare thing in recent FFA delegate history. But we talked about a variety of things and a variety of suggestions that will go to the National FFA Board of Directors, and they will enact the change as they see fit. We suggested the inclusion of a committee that will reevaluate where our FFA national regions will lie. Currently, we have 4 different regions, and we have 6 national officers. This proposal recommends that the Board of Directors reevaluates where our region lines are, because with the passing of the new National FFA Federal Charter last February, that opens the doors for some new opportunities. Within my personal committee of urban agriculture, we recommended that more opportunities be made available to urban FFA programs and urban students through the inclusion of an urban ag day, which would be a social media campaign during FFA week tailored to more specific urban agricultural interests and areas, and other things along the lines of that. Another committee report suggested the use of an FFA jacket that would allow for more inclusive behavior overall. A specific example was given to FFA members who are confined to a wheelchair, basically allowing them to still come into our organization and still being able to wear official dress. Mm-hmm. What was recommended was we still stay with a corduroy jacket, but rather instead of a zipper, we have Velcro, which would be more easily accessible for these students to partake in FFA events. So, Eric, these were just some of the examples that were passed.
And they really do all illustrate how aggressive FFAers are in broadening the reach of the organization to an ever wider range of young people. That's commendable, to be sure. Now, we look ahead to today, and the highlights really revolve around a number of, in our case, Kansas FFA members vying for various awards and recognitions, JW.
Yes. I believe Kansas is being very well represented here at the 92nd National FFA Convention and Expo. We have 5 National Proficiency Award finalists, 2 National Premier Chapter finalists, 3 National Agri-Science Fair finalist groups, 24 National LDE and CDE teams and individuals competing. Overall, Kansas FFA is very busy today, and I'd like to give a huge congratulations to all the teams that have made it this far. As someone who was a chapter officer and someone who was very active in events last year, I know what type of stress and how much hard work that these teams and individuals have, agri-science, LDE, CDE, everyone involved, how much work they have put in. And truly, it is very commendable to have made it this far, Eric.
No question about that. And their results will be forthcoming here in the next day or so, will they not, across most, if not all, of those competitions?
Yes, within the next couple of days, results will be posted, either on social media or the National FFA website.
All right. Also want to follow up and mention briefly here that, again, Kansas has an FFA member in the hunt for a national office. Garrett Craig is going through the next stage of his effort to attain a national office, to reach the finals. That's the goal now.
Yes. My team had dinner with Garrett last night. He is still very excited looking forward, regardless if he gets a national office or not. And I believe that fact in itself is very commendable. Yeah, Garrett from the Clay Center FFA chapter, I believe he's one of the most qualified for this position.
Well, we'll be finding out very soon, within the next day or so, if he does make that cut toward the final round of the National FFA officer election process. So we'll wish him all the best, of course. JW, we appreciate the brief update right here, and we will talk again this same time tomorrow with you, if we might. Many thanks, and enjoy this next day of the convention.
All right, thank you very much.
J.W. Wells with us. He is the Kansas FFA state reporter. And that's the latest from the 92nd National FFA Convention, continuing today in Indianapolis. To conclude this segment, this week's Kansas soybean update with Greg Akagi. Greg?
Timothy Venverlo, Vice President of Sustainability Strategy with the United Soybean Board, joins us. Tim, a new study commissioned by the United Soybean Board revealed the lack of access to broadband in rural areas and how big of a toll it takes on American farmers and the economy.
Over 60% of the U.S. farmers do not have adequate connectivity, and ag represents about $133 billion to the U.S. GDP. When these farmers do not have access to the kind of technology that helps improve their performance, it is not only impacting our food supply, but also our GDP.
What were some of the other significant findings that you found in the study?
The study found that 78% do not have another viable internet provider option, so that goes right to cost and performance. 60% are trying to work with very slow speeds, and only 32% consider that their office connection is reliable. And it's impacting newer technologies out there, devices and machinery that generate data, that talk between the devices, that finally transmit that data to the home office and even out into the internet.
Tim, did the survey indicate anything in particular that affected Kansas farmers?
There were a few quotes from Kansas farmers that I found interesting. They indicated they feared no or low connectivity would leave them behind as ag innovations increasingly include the internet and high-speed broadband.
What does broadband and internet access have to do with sustainability?
If we expect that our farmers produce more safe, reliable, sustainably grown food for our consumption, and we expect them to be a part of the climate solution by putting carbon back into the soil where it's healthy for the soil and healthy for our crops instead of in the air, then we have to give them the technology that allows them to make those kind of decisions and allows their equipment to participate in that high-speed exchange of information and data.
That was Timothy Venverlo, Vice President of Sustainability Strategy with the United Soybean Board, who joins us on the Kansas Soybean Update. It's brought to you by the Kansas Soybean Commission.
Thanks, Greg. Greg Akagi there. And you're listening to Agriculture Today.
While many people know hunger is an issue in developing countries, it is also a problem in our own backyards. In 2010, 1 in 7 Kansans struggled to put adequate food on the table. 2 K-State research and extension programs are tackling this problem. The Family Nutrition Program and Expanded Food and Nutrition Education Program reach thousands of Kansans in more than 70 counties. They learn how to eat healthy with a low budget. For more information about these programs, visit ksre.ksu.edu.
We're back now on Agriculture Today and with our weekly horticulture segment, and one more go at insect activity in our landscapes and home areas. Joining us once again is Raymond Cloyd, horticultural entomologist with K-State Research and Extension. The point being, Raymond, we've had a notable drop in temperatures in recent days. Winter apparently is here, making an early debut. So what is that doing to the insect world out there right now?
Well, that's a good question, Eric, because we get that. As insects slow down, a couple of things happen. Trees will start dropping their leaves, and at that point, the insects are getting these cues about slowing their activity and then possibly going into what they call their overwintering stages, and that could be the egg, larva, pupa, or adult, depending on the insect and even mite. And then they'll slow down, and then they'll be ready go through the winter. And the level of mortality of them will be dependent on the environmental conditions, primarily how severe the winter is. And we haven't had a severe winter in a long time. And then they'll be ready to go in the springtime.
So really very little impediment for insects out there.
Well, they were here before us, and they've evolved many mechanisms to go through the wintertime, whether it be avoidance or whatever, to make it through the winter, Eric. Yeah.
So when we look again at what pests might be remaining active and seeking winter shelter, those invasive species will be around for a while.
Yes. I mean, when we talk about nuisance or invasive pests in your home, the Asian ladybird beetle, box elder bug, crickets, millipedes, things like that, they're wanting to get out of the cold, and so they'll be coming in homes. Ants will do the same thing, especially if it's a dry winter time. We recommend for sealing cracks and crevices as possible. For the ants, you can put bait out. We don't recommend any indoor spraying at all. That's pretty pointless and can result in some indirect effects. And a lot of times when these arthropods come in, they don't last very long because the humidity is so low. Time as you crank your heater up, the humidity goes down, and they just don't survive with those low relative humidities. So eventually they'll die out.
So that's a key point. They will not overwinter in your house and then all of a sudden emerge in a burst in the spring.
Yeah. Now the Asian ladybird beetle, and probably many of you have heard of that, experienced it, will go into the corners of a window sill and just stay there, and then they'll get active in the springtime. And we generally recommend, again, just vacuuming them up and then putting them outside.
Raymond, you wanted to share a word as well about general sanitation in the landscape area to get rid of locations where bugs might hole up for the winter and be active in the springtime as well.
Yeah, one of the things we recommend for the vegetable garden is to rake up all your debris for squash or pumpkins, cucumbers, because that's where squash bug will overwinter. But sound hygiene or sanitation is always critical in minimizing insects overwintering sites. And that's always the first line of defense is always sanitation, removing any weeds in the area because weeds will harbor the insects or mites and possibly provide overwintering sites. But clean up all your debris, burn it, whatever you want to do, get rid of it, and that will help alleviate, not eliminate, but alleviate problems for next year.
And that's true not only of the garden site, but certain places around the home setting, the yard. That'll help with your disease issues too.
Exactly. It runs both for insects, mites, and diseases. Yeah.
All right. We'll touch upon this as well. We mentioned it last week, want to expand on it here. The use of dormant oils on those fruit trees to protect them against insects. And once more, this is an excellent time to apply those products.
Right, Eric. As soon as the leaves drop, like on your apples or pears or nectarines and peaches, the dormant oils are a type of oil. It's a stronger oil than your horticultural oils, and they're designed to kill, by suffocation, the eggs of mites and scales that overwinter on your trees. And so this is one way to, nail them and have high mortality on a stage you couldn't get during the regular season. So a lot of fruit tree growers will apply dormant oil, a volk oil, and that'll suffocate the eggs, suffocate the scales, depending on which type, and that at least reduce the potential for high populations early on in next spring.
As far as product selection, does it matter? Do those products tend to perform equally, those dormant oils?
Well, that's a good question. It really depends on the formulation, the rate, and the concentration. The key is thorough coverage, and of course you want to get the bark and the twigs, which is where these life stages will be overwintering on the trees and shrubs.
And how much of a window of time do folks have to put those on? We've had some cold weather once again recently, so they still have an opportunity to effectively apply these?
Oh, yeah. As soon as the leaves fall off the trees is the time to apply them. Yeah, because some of these can burn the leaves anyway, but if the leaves are going to fall off, read the label, obviously. The label is the law. It makes 1 or 2 applications during the season, the wintertime, and if you get thorough coverage, that should be enough to really help kill those eggs from some mites that overwinter and some of the scales that'll overwinter on trees.
But the key, as you say, is thorough coverage. That's the trick.
High volume applications are critical. If you try to skimp on it, you're gonna regret it next year. Yeah.
But this is a great time to protect your fruit trees, in particular with a dormant oil product, and maybe a second application later on in the winter, but get that initial application on right away. Wanted to mention something about the potential problems returning with the oak leaf itch mite.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, as the oak leaves are falling, this year, when you on perspective, 14, 15, 16 were awful years for the oak leaf itch mite. And again, I want to point out that mite requires a gall folder, which we call the oak marginal leaf gall folder. They feed on the midge larva. But we haven't had that gall for a long time, so consequently, that's going to result in less oak leaf itch mites. What will happen next year, we don't know. I do know that I can tell you that we have revised the Oakley Fish Mite Extension publication with up-to-date information, images. So if you want to read more between now and winter and spring on that mite, you can. It's got some more updated information and some good photos.
But we dodged that bullet this year. It could be back next year. It would be worthwhile to be knowledgeable about it. Anyway.
I think a lot of people, Eric, are knowledgeable about it, especially those that have been bitten before. Yeah.
Check out that extension publication, and that's a good parting thought in general here at Raymond. That is, folks should take advantage of everything that Extension Entomology at K-State can offer to them. Information on dealing with various lawn and garden pests. The starting point would be the entomology website at K-State, entomology.ksu.edu. Click on the Extension tab there, and that'll direct you right toward all of that wealth of information for you, homeowners and gardeners. Raymond, it's been a pleasure as always, and come springtime we'll have you back and get back into the insect world horticulturally.
I look forward to 2020, Eric, and look forward to providing education and helping people deal with insect and mite pests in the landscapes and gardens.
Raymond Cloyd, horticultural entomologist, K-State Research and Extension. Once more featured on this week's horticulture segment. Remember, as we go, to look into our podcast service, agtoday.net, agtoday.net. In the meantime, please rejoin us right here tomorrow. Eric Atkinson here for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.